Nothing in this podcast is intended to render legal, financial, medical, or other professional information. Because the details of your situation are fact dependent, we highly encourage you to find a recommended individual that you can trust to give you the expertise that you need related to your situation.
Well, good morning or good evening, Docpreneur Nation. You're listening to Concierge Medicine Today's Docpreneur Leadership Podcast. And today we have a very special repeat guest, Dr. Brook Choulet. And she is with Choulet Performance Psychiatry with multiple locations, but primarily based in Arizona. Dr. Choulet, thanks for being a guest here again.
Thanks for having me, and it's so good to see you. I just saw you in Atlanta, but I always love when we get to connect.
Absolutely. Well, I know that we have a short amount of window of time and we want to use it as productively as we possibly can. So tell us a little bit about your new book and a little bit about your practice and why you wrote the book to coincide with what you're doing in your practice.
Sure. So, for those of you that don't know my story, I started a group concierge practice while I was in fellowship training, and I expanded over the last 4 years now to have 11 clinicians, split between psychiatrists, psychologists, a therapist, and we just hired a mental performance coach. And so, for me, really, I really focused a lot of my time on building a business with little financial resources at the beginning because I was in training, right? And we don't have a lot of financial resources even to just live our day-to-day lives at that time. So then I saw a growing need where in the community people were reaching out to me over the last year. How did you become a thought leader in your niche? How did you develop a niche? How do you market? How did you brand yourself? And I saw a need for me to put out this book. And what many people don't know is that I was diagnosed with a vocal cord nodule at the beginning of December from talking too much. And between all the speaking engagements I was doing in the office and at home, so I was put on voice rest for 2 weeks.
Mm.
And I was so kind of disheartened by not being able to talk. I pumped out this book starting December 8th. I wrote the whole thing in 3 weeks, and then I had it published by January 1st.
And you went the self-publishing route for those who are physicians or considering writing a book.
I did, yeah, and I went into it. We were talking about this before we started recording about those expectations that people often have when they publish, and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm going to sell all these copies and this and that." I went into it just being like really happy that this was a milestone that I had accomplished and being totally okay with whatever the result was as long as I broke even. That was kind of my big thing.
Yeah. And when you think about breaking even, was it the costs associated with just the self-publishing process, or did you think about your time and requirements of like, because some people take 2 years to write a book, some people take
Mhm.
3 weeks to write a book.
I typically would think about my time, but because I wasn't able to talk, I wasn't able to work anyways, and it coincided with the holidays, and it was like the perfect storm of everything slowing down. So I would have been not seeing patients and not working during that time anyways. So for me, I saw it as a break even of the self-publishing costs.
So tell us a little bit about some of the responses you've had from the book, or is it a little bit too early to receive some of those?
Oh yeah, I was thrilled with the response. I broke even within 4 days, so I was really excited. It seemed like this was a book that a lot of people had been waiting for, and just seeing my journey over the last few years and how quickly I was able to grow a practice and a brand. I think a lot of people were intrigued by reading my story and reading about what my recommendations are. So I was really, really overwhelmed with gratitude to see the response.
Well, I know, like we were talking about earlier, you will give away your book sometimes more than you sell it. And that's a good thing as an author because you want to get it into the hands of the people that need it. And so maybe it's one or two here that you're going to meet with a group or,
Mhm.
whatever, but you never know the impact. I remember this was a few years ago in the 2010 era, where a physician came to one of our events and she had pretty much it looked like it had been run over by a truck several times. It had
Oh.
earmarks and post-it notes, and she's like, I just really, I've used this over and over and over. And so I hope
Mhm.
that you find in the next few years or even sooner that you will have that similar approach. But one of the things that a lot of doctors struggle with is moving forward in kind of a moving forward with their idea, struggling with to say, I've got this big hairy idea, but I'm just not sure when to implement it, how to execute it,
Mhm.
especially for physicians. What's the first step in the book that you describe that they should take beyond just I've got an idea? Okay, now what do I do with the idea? I've seen folks develop business plans and then they put it in a binder or a PDF
Mhm.
and then they never look at it again. They just get busy.
Yeah, I think a lot of people almost get scared when it seems like a giant uphill battle. You're like standing at the bottom of the mountain, looking up, and your head's up, and it's just overwhelming. And so I encourage people, whatever the process is, opening a business, writing a book, breaking it down into actionable steps. So, for example, maybe you block an hour of your day for as long as it takes to write the book, and you're blocking time. So I'm a huge fan and proponent of time blocking, and I put in my calendar when I need to get something done rather than just having this running to-do list, right? Because to-do lists are only as good as if you work through them. So if you just keep this to-do list that has gathering tasks, now you're really struggling to actually execute on them. But by time blocking in your calendar, you can really ensure that you have dedicated time to work through those.
Now, as we move forward and kind of discuss like taking idea to reality, one of the things that most physicians will focus on is, well, how do I pay for this idea? And so, have experienced, you've moved your organization from, kind of an umbrella brand to having several organizations underneath it. Talk to us a little bit about how you did that and the unique steps that you describe in the book that helped you build what you had, the organizations that you have today.
Yeah, the book really is like that kind of step one, right? Which is like just that opening and getting a business started and doing it the right way. And then I hope in the future to do one on scaling too, because then once you have the company, what can you do to actually grow it into other locations? And there's different ways about it. Like you could franchise, you could own your own and bootstrap it, you could get investors to then have the funds to grow rapidly. So there's so many different ways about it. My way is not the right way for everyone. It was the right way for me. But I think, asking people to really think about what's your long-term plan and how can you take steps now to work towards that? Because if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there?
And one of the things that causes some reflection for us while we're thinking about taking idea from an idea to a reality is, you know, uh, describe a time when the words um, that positively influenced you kind of help motivate you to take like, I'm going to do this. Like, I don't care what
Mhm.
gets in my way. I'm going to make this happen.
Yeah, for me, it was when someone said that my business would fail. That for me was that moment where I was like, absolutely not. I'm not going to let that happen. And it gave me the fire to move forward and it put my foot on the gas and really accelerate. And I think also just staying up to date with latest innovations, seeing new companies pop up, seeing new ideas pop up, and it really drives you to stay motivated on and stay on top of the times and stay relevant.
I want to talk a little bit about because really seen, how I don't know if it's person to person, but you become more self-aware of things, and
Mhm.
you maybe a topic is in rolling around in your head, and the next thing you know, you see it everywhere. That what is it? Cognitive bias? Is that
Uh-huh.
what it's termed? And journaling for me has seen maybe it's the algorithm that we're all used to, that we're all being
Maybe.
manipulated by is, and I'm sure that has something to do with it. But checking in with yourself, was that part of your process?
It wasn't as early as it should have been. So I think that's something to remember for the audience is when I opened the practice, I was 26. So I was like really young and didn't know what I was doing and trying to figure things out along the way. So this last year, this last December was the first time I really had like a strategic planning meeting with myself. And I'm like, okay, what are the goals in 2025? What are we moving towards? What are the quarterly targets? And then really taking time to reflect on that. Because before that, I'm very organized, but I didn't think I didn't think I had an organized enough way that I was moving forward with purpose. So for me, that was a big pivot in December, was taking more time to self-reflect, which I just think I just didn't know to do before. I was young and I had no mentors.
Well, now that a little bit of that sharing of your hindsight is 2020, what are some of the pitfalls that you feel like you've described in the book that were like, I would have done this differently. I would have maybe not
Mhm,
moonlighted it as much. I maybe would have gotten even a different track of education on more of a business side because I find that it is so rare that so many physicians will follow their entrepreneurial tendencies. They'll get into their path, which is in their
mhm,
lane, which is wonderful, and they need to stay in their lane, and many do, and they work for systems and but those who are independently minded, maybe more entrepreneurial, what is that? There's a whole mountain that to tackle on the entrepreneurial side of where do you go learn, what resources should and people and voices should you be listening to?
mhm,
We talked a little bit about this past year is, hey, if organizations like Home Depot and Coca-Cola have a board of advisors, there's no reason that you as a physician shouldn't have one too.
mhm. Yeah, there's two big things that I would have gone back and done differently or changed. One is the name, which I did change 3 years down the line. So we opened as Choulet Wellness, and I think it was such a mistake, and I talk about it in the book because it didn't differentiate us from anything. Sure, it had my last name, which was also probably a mistake, right? But then it had this word wellness, which just to me is so overused and become diluted to the point where it just doesn't even mean anything anymore. And I tell people in the book, how are you going to stand out among everyone else? So if you're at an event and someone asks you, what do you do? And you're like, I'm a psychiatrist and I just opened my private practice. I hope I get patients. Okay, now take the second person. You walk up and you're like, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm a psychiatrist. I specialize in seeing postpartum women, before pregnancy, during and after, and I'm open now. Please, here's my card. Which person sticks out in your mind more? The psychiatrist who was ambivalent about presenting that they had this new practice and had no specialty, right? Which I'm sure they do. They just haven't branded themselves as that. Or the person who is confident in asserting what they do and had like a niche, right? And so in the book, I really talk about how niching and branding is so important because Shule Wellness didn't allow us to have any sort of a brand or a niche that you could tell obviously from the name. And then with
Mhm.
Shule Performance Psychiatry, I went so far as to trademark the name federally and really get kind of get my feet dug in the ground of high performance psychiatry and then name the clinic on that. So that was one mistake is the name. And then the second, I wouldn't necessarily call this a mistake, but it was a giant challenge, was signing for a large office lease while I was still in training. I signed for an 8 office, 2,800 square foot lease, and I signed a personal guarantee, and I was just forced to make it work. Luckily, we had 1 month in the negative over the last 4 years, but it
Wow.
was really challenging to do that. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And then you like are just forced to make it work because you have to make this payment every month.
Yeah. And that is motivating. If you look back and you think, well, if I didn't have that payment, would I have worked this hard and done stepped on these paths?
Mhm. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have worked as hard had I not done the office space. I think things would have still worked out if I had changed the name or kept the name, whatever. But the office space really is what made me make sure that the business succeeded.
And I want to talk just a moment on the name because we do find in healthcare it is so often, usually it's sometimes named usually named after the physician's last name or
Hmm.
it's, Johns Creek Psychiatry or Johns
Hmm.
Creek Primary Care. It's named after a
Right.
city or an area. Talk to us a little bit about why you think that maybe the name, putting your last name on that, because, and this is, I mean, I know the answer, but I want for you to
Mhm.
share that with them, what you think that the pitfalls and opportunities are.
Right. One thing is that when I started, And this was again before I signed that office lease. I thought that I was going to be solo, just like my mom for forever. She's a solo child and adolescent and adult psychiatrist. And I was like, yeah, I'll be solo. I'll name it Chule Wellness and it'll be affiliated with me. But then the second you start to hire other people and you have prospective patients calling, they want to just see you, right? Why would they want to see someone else whose name isn't on the title, you know? So that's one complicating factor. And then the other thing is it's depending on what your goals are for the clinic or the practice. It if you have a big personal brand, then it might be helpful to keep your name on it. So when we went through the name change and we went from Chule Wellness to Chule Performance Psychiatry, I actually polled my group and I said, "Hey, there's 11 of us now. Like, we should take my name out of it and just have it be Performance Psychiatry." And they're like, "No, you built such a brand and a name," and they actually all voted to keep my name in it. So that's what
Mhm.
we ended up doing. But then on the logo, we just made my name like very small and then performance psychiatry big. But I think that's a big challenge is it just depends. Do you have a personal brand? Do people know who you are? Will that help get business? And at this point, I think it does. But at the beginning, I wasn't anticipating um, keeping my name as part of it.
And then as a marketing background myself, I think that that was wise to make your name smaller in the future because it will make you be able to easily brand perform. Now that might be very common trademark and probably is trademarked already, performance psychiatry or whatever you decide to it ends up being, because there will come a time where you'll want to take a back seat to some of the
Mhm.
organizational activities and just focus on maybe building this side of the business or that side of the
Mhm.
business. Let's talk about your target audience because I think that your unique niche in your business, which your practice is a business, and
Mhm.
you have employees and you have
Mhm.
subcontractors and you have leases and you have expenses. And so you're not doing what you do for charity, and people rely on you.
Mhm.
What systems in your organization are currently working so well that they're almost invisible?
Yeah, I would say, well, first I want to go back to the trademark because when I did create the name, I actually did trademark performance psychiatry. And I
Wow.
wanted that, yeah, I wanted that trademark. I wanted that. And it synced well with my personal brand, which is the performance psychiatrist, which is trademarked. And then I trademarked performance psychiatry. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind when you're building a brand is looking at what's trademarked already. Um, but in terms of, sorry, can you repeat the question?
So two questions, and I tend to do that in my interviews, is I throw out a grenade of questions. So I apologize. I want to talk first about the target audience. Your target audience is more high performing individuals and high performing athletes. Now, some folks, in healthcare, particularly, in more of the traditional primary care family medicine settings, will might be like, well, why focus on those? Those people can afford, you know, to go to anybody. Why would you focus on them? And so, talk a little bit about the adversity and the opportunity you've had with learn and what you've learned from targeting a high performing individual.
Yeah, people ask me all the time if I wanted to go into sports or that, that was a path I was trying to go down. And the answer was it really wasn't. When I opened the concierge practice, what I found was that I had athletes that were wanting me to do home visits for their kids because they couldn't be seen in a public setting.
Mm.
Imagine like an NBA player, NFL quarterback, or wide receiver that's very well known sitting in a waiting room waiting for their child, and that's going to be disruptive to the treatment that's trying to occur. So that's how I ended up landing in the sports and performance space was that it is challenging for people to get medical services unless they're brought to their home because of the privacy issues and the discretion that's needed.
What is the mindset that physicians of different specialties need to overcome when they think about, well, I was taught to treat everybody and be everything to everyone at all times.
Mhm.
And I have to wake up with that responsibility and carry that burden on my shoulders every day. How do they wrestle with that and try to overcome that as they build their practice? They build a concierge practice more specifically.
Yeah, I think a lot of people encounter imposter syndrome, right? Where they just feel like they're not good enough, or they feel like they have this negative self-talk, like they don't deserve to be there, or they feel bad for charging private pay rates, and all these things can be really detrimental to someone's ability to perform well at their job. So whether you're a physician, you're an athlete, whoever you are, it can that imposter syndrome and that self-doubt, because that's really what it boils down to, can be really detrimental to your ability to just do your job well.
I want to go back to time blocking because I'm aware of the clock and I'm aware of our
Uh-huh.
time together today. But I think that that's interesting. And when we say that, it's an easy thing to skim over. But I want
Mhm.
to talk about that because as we start a new year, as we move forward in our careers, as we have this big idea for a practice, we want to see it succeed by summer. How did you start that? Did you say, okay, here's what I want to do between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. Here's what I want to do between 9 a.m., and eliminate distractions because those are the things, the notifications. You
Mhm.
probably have heard them over our interview here.
Uh-huh.
How does that start? And then how do you keep up the time block so that you aren't notified or distracted?
Mhm. Yeah, so one is if you haven't read Dan Martell's Buy Back Your Time, it's fantastic. He talks about creating your perfect week, which was part of my 2025 planning, is that I did create what my week looks like, and every hour of every day, Monday through Friday, is time blocked with a certain allocation, whether it's for external meetings and media, for patient care, syncing up with my assistant, syncing up with our care coordinator at the clinic. Every 15 minutes is scheduled and it's accounted for. And by having time blocks, it really allows me to stay focused and productive while getting what I need to done. So if you write out all the things that you need to get done in a week on the left side of a board and then kind of fill in by hour your Monday through Friday, it is really life changing. I'm obsessed with it and I'm hardcore sticking to it for this year. And then I think it's important for people to actually write down, like, what are three things that you want to get done today? What are three things you want to get done in this time blocked hour? Because it's easy to end our days feeling a sense of unachievement or lack of achievement. Like, oh, I had all this time, I didn't even get anything done. But in reality, you may have actually gotten done five things, but you didn't write them down. So, from a mindset perspective, you feel like you didn't do enough. So, by writing down 3 to 5 things a day, you're forcing yourself to have that sense of achievement and have that small win.
So each day, is there fluidity within that schedule? Is there a little bit of margin for those interruptions?
I mean, in my patient care days, I schedule in 50-minute blocks so that I have 10 minutes in between to catch up on things as needed. But I'm pretty diligent about sticking to the schedule and I don't really let it veer off track.
What are you doing in the midst of creating and building this business, writing a book, growing your business, that keeps you grounded and enjoying going to work on Monday morning?
I just love what I do, and I think I'm fortunate to do that. I'll never forget. I was at UPS recently, and I was mailing out something, and the guy was like, I don't know why, but he was giving me a hard time about the stamp pattern that I chose, and he asked me out of the blue. He's like, "Do you actually like your job?" And I was like, "Yeah, I love my job." And he's like, "Oh, well, that's nice." And it was really like kind of a wake up call for me. I'm like, wow, I not everyone out there loves what they do. And I think the in order to have grit, right, you have to have passion and perseverance. And if you're passionate about what you do, it's easy to keep going.
Yeah. How do you differentiate and describe to a physician, well, that sounds like it's a good moonlighting gig or a good hobby, but that might not be a good job?
That's a tough one, right? And I always joke about what's the IRS definition of a hobby is something that doesn't make any money. So I really encourage people to have hobbies, right? Because we all need that balance and something we enjoy to prevent or mitigate burnout. So for someone that is in that employed hospital physician that doesn't have control over their days and is being told rather than the teller of what to do. It's important to have these balancing things, right? Where if that's draining your energy, well, what are you doing to fill it?
I remember I think it was my college advisor told me, look, you might be really gifted at something, but
Hmm.
and you might really love what you're doing, but at that job, but at the same time, there's going to be maybe 20% of that job that you're not good at and you just
Hmm.
don't like that part of the job. But the other 80%, it's what keeps you excited about walking into the box on Monday morning.
Hmm.
As we move into our final moments here, I'm going to give you a few questions. You can be however brief or long-winded as you like, but I want to make sure we're productive on the corporate and building a business practice side of things. And systems must continuously be evaluated and adjusted to meet current practice needs. Um, what works today may not work tomorrow. For you, Dr. Choulet, what systems in the organization right now that you're building are currently working so well that they're almost invisible?
I would say our EHR system practice queue, it's just does the job of like three employees, I would say. So it has automatic credit card processing, the super bill creation's easy, scheduling is easy, form sending, completion, tasks, everything's so easy. It's like a very well-oiled machine. We have one employee for 11 clinicians. We have one admin staff for 11 clinicians. And it's because our systems are so efficient and so automated.
Uh, how many EHRs did you evaluate before landing on the one that you liked over the last few years?
I interviewed about seven of them.
Yeah. What recurring issues suggest that there is a system that needs improvement?
Hmm. I would say this as small and silly as this sounds is that there's no way for us to be notified when a credit card is expiring. It has to like decline first in order to trigger us to send a new card authorization. So that's kind of one um, kind of squeaky wheel that we keep coming on.
I think it was Andy Stanley in his leadership podcast. One of them was a description recently about the difference between tensions to manage and problems
Mhm.
to solve. Problems to solve are easily almost black and white issues. You can solve those. Like, okay, we have a personnel issue. We can solve that. Or,
Mhm.
is this more of somebody we really value you here and you're a great asset, but we maybe need to tweak your job description, put you in a better spot. Are there outdated or unwritten rules in your organization right now that are hindering progress or growth or maybe right now, or that you see on the horizon?
Yeah, I think that we were getting to a point where we're expanding so quickly that we needed time to catch up a little bit. So I feel like for a minute there, it was playing catch up and like, okay, how can we continue to grow at a high quality, rate? But I think I've really been more intentional about hires and, you know, the premium services. That's my goal is that the company is providing premium services that you can't get anywhere else, and that's what justifies the price point because we do provide such tailored care to all of our patients. So to me it was almost like, okay, we don't have a problem yet, but I don't want there to be a problem, so I'm going to stop the growth in terms of number of clinicians for the time being.
And very briefly, under your umbrella organization, Choulet Performance Psychiatry, how many practices or locations and providers do you have?
Yeah, so we have three locations: San Diego, Beverly Hills, and Scottsdale. And then we have 11 providers.
Wow. All right, last couple of questions. What systems could be put into place to encourage collaboration and innovation among all of those folks that you're working with?
We do a monthly case conference. So we all get on Zoom since we're in different places and just catch up, talk about any inefficiencies, talk about how we can make things more efficient. So we do that monthly, which is really great for keeping us all on the same page.
Now, moving quickly to our last couple of questions. Um, I have a number of questions I've already written down. I'm trying to make sure I use our time effectively here. Um, well, this is pretty, that's not a good one. Let's let's go off script on this one. Let's look at if you were to have a meeting tonight with a few physicians who say, I've got an idea and I really like how you've executed and built your practices and built your
Mhm.
businesses. I don't necessarily want to grow that fast, but I don't know how to um, pay for it. I don't know how to move forward with my idea. I've got
Mhm.
naysayers around me and I've got some good people around me. What do I do now?
I tell them when I do consulting work that you can open a practice with like 15 to $1,800 a month overhead. It does not have to be crazy, crazy expensive. So, if you're interested, contact me. But yeah, that's what I tell them. It doesn't have to be expensive. That's a misconception.
When you started your concierge practice or you had this idea of it, and you address this in the book as well, I want to talk about overcoming fear real quickly as we end. Um, how did you overcome that fear of failure?
This sounds silly, but it's the truth. There's just no time for it. I don't have time to think about failure. I just have to move forward. What's next? That's always what I'm focused on. And whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. That's just how I am. But there's no time to think about failure. That's just going to keep you stuck in the past.
Well, you're very, very grounded, both professionally and personally. And I remember a few years ago thinking, you're the rising superstar. You're going to
Oh,
be
thank
on
you.
boards. You're going to be creating amazing businesses, and you've already started to accomplish so much of that. And what's next for you? Where do you see yourself, in 5 years?
That's a tough question. I guess I see myself continuing to grow the clinics. That's where my heart and soul lies, and doing other fun things along the way. I love writing for media right now. I'm loving all the different aspects of how each day looks a little bit different. So I really just see myself continuing on the same path.
Well, we want to thank you, Dr. Choulet, for being our guest today. How can folks get in touch with you? We'll put the links as well to your book and your practice website and to how to learn more, and as well as the Amazon link and your personal
Yeah.
discount link, because you can actually get it cheaper through your discounted link. Is that still correct?
Yes, through my website. Yeah, I
Yeah.
really appreciate you having me today, and I always love our discussions. And people can find me through my website. It's brookchouletmd.com. That's BROOKCHOULETMD.com. The name or the email and the number on there are my direct email and phone number. So contact me. I'd love to chat and hear more about your businesses, and can't wait to see what's next for everyone and how this book impacts people's practices.
It is certainly going on our short list. We release a list twice a year, summertime for reading lists for vacations and wintertime. And we have a kind of a top 5 or 6 books that we hand out
Okay.
like candy to doctors. And this is going to make that short list of
Oh,
five or
thank
six
you.
books that we want curious physicians who have a great idea to move into the practice of their dreams so that they don't get the Sunday scaries and they do see that they're going to enjoy their work in
Mhm.
medicine moving forward. Dr. Choulet, thanks for being our guest. We'll link all of the information in the show notes below of how to connect with Dr. Choulet, her practice, as well as get the new book. Thank you, Dr. Choulet, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.